Hi, I'm Robby Bobby, grateful member of ACA. The topic of this video is Imaginary Problems, Imaginary God. The inspiration for the title comes from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which talks about resentments, or at least perceived harms that cause them, as being both real and imagined. FYI, I'm not in AA, but I believe that para-alcoholics, or at least half alcoholic, and as such can benefit from studying AA's foundational literature. Anyway, it made me look at the 14 traits in the same light, and when I looked at each trait, I can see there were parts that were real and parts that were not. The traits, by the way, are collectively referred to as the problem. So when I say imaginary problems, it refers to the parts of each trait that are in fact imaginary. Before I give an example, I want to first say that what happened to us as children is real. Our emotional wounds are real. Our defense mechanisms are real. Our feelings are real. How the traits show up in our lives is real. On the other hand, our own literature defines para-alcoholism as the chronic fear and distorted thinking of our family passed down to us. And it's this distorted thinking that causes me to imagine that I'm somehow less than, that I'm defective, that I'm unlovable, etc. And it's this distorted thinking or imaginary beliefs that power the traits. Let's look at trait 1. We became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. When I look honestly at myself, I can see it's the fear of authority figures that trigger my need to isolate. Why? Authority figures make me feel small and weak. They make me feel dumb. They have the power to control me and expose me. To make matters worse, my ACA brain can turn just about anyone into an authority figure. Girlfriends always seem to be high on my list of imaginary authority figures. I can also make traditional authority figures, such as a policeman or a boss, into a larger one than they actually are. When I look at examples of how this trait has made my life unmanageable, it almost always traces back to imagined authority as opposed to actual authority. Yet the fear and isolation are very real. When I recognize that the root of my trait 1 problem is imaginary, the fear is lifted and there is no longer a need to isolate. This is very similar to letting go of resentments by realizing that perceived harms were imagined. Imaginary authority figures, imaginary harms, imaginary problems. I'm not saying that every problem is imaginary, but even real problems can be made worse by imagining they are. So how do you deal with these imaginary problems? When I asked myself this question, my thought was, an imaginary God. Because my imaginary God knows exactly how to deal with imaginary problems, as well as the real ones. In fact, my imaginary God wrote the steps, wrote the laundry list, and put the entire ACA program together, so she can help me with anything related to my recovery. By the way, I don't think it's controversial or disrespectful to refer to my God as imaginary. Step 3 allows me to have a God of my own understanding. I'm just phrasing that a little different. I believe that God exists and that God is real. It is my concept of God that's imagined. And I want to imagine the best possible God. And imagining the best possible God is a good thing to do because it's believed that children project their parents' characteristics onto God. This is great if you had parents that loved you unconditionally and always made you feel safe. Not so great if you're currently in ACA. I think part of the effects of growing up in an alcoholic or dysfunctional home is not only a distorted view of self, but also of God or higher power. I see reimagining God as a necessary and ongoing process for my own recovery. And my God can help me with this too, if I ask. God, please help me to see all the areas that my distorted thinking has crept into, including thoughts about you, God. If you like this video, then you might benefit from looking at each trait from the perspective of real versus imagined. Then, see where it takes you. I'm Robby Bobby. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep coming back. And if you made it this far, please let me know by clicking the like button. Thank you.